After days of unease and speculation over cabinet appointments, the president and his deputy present a united front during a requiem mass for the burial of 3 bishops who lost their lives in our roads sometime last week. This happens even as the president issues a directive that all NTSA officers should now keep off our highways and let the work of enforcing traffic laws to the traffic department of the National Police Service. That story and more could be found on page 5 of the Standard. Also on the front page, Raila says the president broke the law on police changes. He says the recent appointments should have been made by the National Police Service and not by the president. The story we've just seen in our news, Gideon Moi, Baringo senator, is now going to chair the ICT committee in the Senate, and he also comes out clean and says even if he were to be appointed as for consideration in the cabinet, he would still not take up the offer. Quite an interesting story. New rules to control use of painkillers and syrups. This, as it now emerges that there are quite a number of over-the-counter medicine that people buy and use with prescription or without prescription, and some people end up abusing such medicine. Stories about NTSA officers ordered off roads. Police are now to enforce traffic rules can be found on page 5 of the Standard. On page 6, more details about President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto battling talks of rift over the reconstitution of Parliament. On page, reconstitution of the cabinet. On page 7 of the Standard, NASA MPs. NASA MP, particularly Kitutu Chache South Member of Parliament Richard Onyonka, now defies Raila on resist call and says President Uhuru Kenyatta has the instruments of power, and so any other notion or allegation or thoughts about swearing in Raila Odinga as the people's president, as NASA has been saying, is not applicable. Report back for Form 1, report to school for Form 1s. Form 1s flock to schools amid confusion over free learning. That and more we'll be looking at as we look at what's making headlines today with my guests this morning, Dan Manzo, Member of Parliament for Makueni, and of course Dr. Sam Kamau, as I told you earlier, who is a political strategist. On the Daily Nation front page, protesters Form 1s are locked out over fees. Now parents cry foul as the schools demand thousands of shillings for lunch and caution money, repudiating the government's free day schools policy. I'll be asking my panelists this morning, so where exactly is the confusion? The government says the Minister for CS Education, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, the acting CS, was yesterday quoted as saying for day school students, all they have to do is walk into school with the uniform, and that they should not even be compelled to pay any money for lunch programs. The parents should make arrangements themselves. Other stories in the Daily Nation, like I told you earlier, new plans put to test as Form 1 admission starts. Much more on education on page 2 and 3 of the Daily Nation. Page 4, Uhuru and Ruto downplay split claims in cabinet formation. And Gideon Moi, Baringo senator, says, I would say no if asked to be Kenyatta's CS. Raila Odinga, the leader of NASA, says Uhuru abused power in the police changes. And Kisii MPs oppose Raila oath. That and many more on page 5 of the Daily Nation. Page 6, the suit against Nairobi Governor Gideon Mike Mbuvi Sonko has been struck out. Now petitioners to the case have now been ordered to pay the county boss and IEBC a total of 2.5 million shillings each as costs for the case. Further afield, South African President Jacob Zuma's future tops agenda at the next ANC forum. That and more can be found on page 9 of the Daily Nation, and page 10 and page 11 rather. Like we started this show this morning, there was a power outage in many parts of the country yesterday. Apparently it even affected the neighboring country, Uganda, and our businesses were forced to close early as those with generators incurred heavy losses. Kenya Power came out and said, blamed it on a technical hitch, and actually assured consumers that they would restore supply as soon as possible. Places like Kisumu City, except for lighting coming from businesses with generators, most roads were dark as street lights were off. Actually, 2 flights were reportedly cancelled from Kisumu International Airport, and travelers were forced to spend the night in the city. Back page of the Daily Nation, keep off our roads. Now President orders NTSA and says the work of enforcing traffic laws will now go back to the traffic department of the National Police force, which takes us police service, which takes me to my panelists this morning. Welcome, Dr. Sam Kamau and Mheshimiwa Dan Maanzo. I start with you, Mheshimiwa Dan Maanzo. The directive by the President that NTSA officers should keep off our roads. Is it a solution? Is it legal?
First of all, this is something the President should have done a long time ago. At all material times, NTSA has been an illegal body, and the functions it is, which has been executing, are not anchored in the law. You know, the Traffic Act it clearly deals with the police officers, and the police officers are the ones able to take an offender to court and get that particular offender charged. NTSA does not have that mandate, and just as the President has made a declaration in Meru that they participate in other activities, it is almost the same way NTSA was formed as a parastatal. In fact, it was formed at a time Kenya was trying to trim down on parastatals. Now its duty has been reduced to assist KRA in collecting revenue in terms of a few things. So it should be actually a full-fledged department of KRA, which must be monitored very well, because in the few days it has been on the streets, there has been serious allegations of corruption, and its officials must clearly be vetted if they are now going to handle finances in other sectors. And I have, you know, personally as a traveler and as a person who has had an opportunity to work with them. In fact, one time I was summoned by NTSA, and I appeared, and whatever they intended to do was really ridiculous. And eventually, even when you send your vehicle for inspection, they are very inefficient. In fact, the police did a better job. So I think the matter needs to be relooked at. Parliament as a role, we have to look at the law forming them and make sure that they perform their rightful duties. The issue about road accidents is a very serious matter. It is not really, and cannot fully be blamed on NTSA. Kenyans have to be responsible. We have to avoid carelessness on the road. We have to make sure that vehicles are checked properly, private vehicles and commercial vehicles, because a lot of accidents and a lot of deaths have been caused by defective vehicles. The mechanism of establishing that is what NTSA was supposed to do.
Let's go back down memory lane, Mheshimiwa, and look at what really informed the decision to have NTSA officers go onto the highways.
Well, it was a decision which did not have a force of law, or was not sanctioned by Parliament. The structure to form such a state corporation is actually very weak, and at all material times it has been illegal. It's only that you know, the police who complained did not have a mechanism to go to court, or the time it came to us as members of Parliament. It has come to me quite a number of times. We thought the government would quickly, you know, do something about it, and when we encouraged it to do so, you know, ordinarily this must come from the Department of Roads, you know, the minister in charge of roads, and you see, when we made proposals as a Parliament, you could see the law is not forthcoming quickly. Is
it within the mandate of the CS in charge of roads to issue regulations regarding operations and safety in our roads?
In fact,
could that be what he did?
As Parliament, we have summoned NTSA once. They had purported to come up with a regulation which had not been sanctioned by Parliament. And as soon as we summoned them under the Committee of Delegated Legislation, which I sat in the last Parliament, they quickly withdrew and promised that they were going to make better regulations, which have to be signed by the minister and were to be brought back to Parliament. That never happened. I must say there has been a lot of laxity, and I must also say the minister has not been serious at all. In fact, I'm surprised he has been listed again as a cabinet, to be vetted as a cabinet.
Dr. Sam Kamau, are we looking at a situation where fingers or NTSA is now being accused of the over 400 lives and many more maimed in our roads in the last 2 months? Is the directive by the President a clear indication that they are to blame?
Well, to an extent, yes. You remember there has been a public outcry, especially over the deaths that occurred in December owing to the road accidents. And if NTSA, and we know they are charged with, you know, ensuring compliance with the regulations.
Legal.
But also, yes, but also even in terms of safety. Therefore, the blame has to go somewhere, and they bear that responsibility. Also, the declaration by the president, of course, is in a sense a vote of, no confidence in the operations of the road. But I think there is also some confusion that is coming up in the sense that NTSA has not been disbanded, as some people would think, and perhaps those who enjoy driving, when they are drunk or maybe speeding, they think that now that NTSA has been forced or ordered out of the roads, it means now they have the license to do these things. But I think what the president did yesterday, my reading of it is there has been that confusion in terms of the role of NTSA, because even their presence on the road has not necessarily made the situation improve. But it doesn't mean that generally now that the roles that in my opinion they were encroaching on the role of the traffic police, that means now that these operations will now cease, but they can focus on compliance and harmonizing the operations of the different departments within the traffic
licensing,
exactly, registration and such, but actually also ensuring compliance, and also perhaps even in the role of policy making and legislation, working closely with the ministry. But I would also say that there was a need, based on the question that you asked a little bit earlier, the thinking that informed formation of NTSA as or
the decision to allow them onto the highways.
Well, that one perhaps may have been misinformed, because they were not necessarily supposed to go into enforcement. But in terms of compliance, that is their responsibility. And perhaps the thinking was good in the sense that there was a gap. You remember a while back, especially under the coalition government, the Grand Coalition government, there was always the police, whenever accidents happened, the police would say it is the work of the ministry, to come up with the laws and the regulations, the legislation to support that. And when the transport minister at that time, Mwakwere, he used to say it is not our work to enforce, we make the law. So there was actually that gap between the policy making and enforcement, and perhaps that is what informed the decision by NTSA to go to the roads. But I want to say that their presence on the road has not necessarily helped, because it ended up creating confusion. But also in terms of, and you have to remember, the reason for the accidents, of course, cannot always be blamed on the NTSA, because drivers have to take personal responsibility. People who drive when they are drunk, people who speed or overspeed, as we like saying, they also have to take that personal responsibility. But I have to admit that NTSA has not really helped by being on the road. And perhaps if they focus on their mandate properly and allow the police also to do their job, of course we can't discount the issue of
which is mainly policy formulation as far as road safety.
Yes, policy formulation, but also even inspection and ensuring that we don't have unroadworthy vehicles on the road. They can do that, and perhaps now work closely with the police, because you said the gap between policy making and their enforcement has to be looked at. But I could also tackle the issue of corruption, because there was always that feeling that perhaps the traffic department or traffic police department was irredeemably corrupt, and perhaps when TSA came on the road, the initial story was they are not corrupt, and then eventually it said that they actually take bigger bribes. I think that is also something we have to look at. So I'm looking at the role of policy, legislation, the way you are saying. We're also looking at issue of personal responsibility of the driver, but we're also looking at the issue of corruption. We have to tackle all these things.
So in a nutshell, gentlemen, we are agreeable that the decision by the president to instruct NTSA officers to move out of our highways was quite in order.
Absolutely. Only that now we have to go beyond that and address also the other issues. Because you see, for example, NTSA, and this is one of the problems I've had with them, hiding in bushes and, to...
But even traffic police officers, the ones with the speed guns, they hide in bushes.
Absolutely. But you see, NTSA could also have done better in terms of creating awareness, for example, in terms of, safety, and introducing better, just civic education. The public need to know what are some of the things we need to do to ensure, because and the president alluded to that yesterday, said that almost 80% of the accidents on the roads will involve people who are either not following the law, and roadworthy vehicles is careless driving. You find people who are driving while they are under the influence of alcohol. I think NTSA could also play a role in terms of what I'm calling public education, ensuring also, for example, the driving schools, which is also another area. If you the people who went to driving school, especially in the last, I would say, 15 years, The test itself is you go to the board and within 2 minutes you're told you have passed.
Through, yeah.
I remember also how I got my license is that when the driving test, I think I drove for about 20 meters and I was told you are okay.
I wonder what Mheshimiwa Maanzo
Then
did.
I go to the road and I have now to figure out how I realize what I learned in school may not necessarily have helped me.
Thank you very much. Now we move on very quickly because we are almost agreeable on that. The decision by the President was quite in order so that we restore sanity in our roads. But the most important and critical thing is that all road users have to take responsibility, so that we can bring down the number of lives that are lost wantonly in our roads. Now, moving on quickly to cabinet reconstitution and the politics around it. I will start with you again, Sam, in this case, before I come to Mheshimiwa for obvious reasons. As a political strategist, what is your take on the partial reconstitution of the cabinet?
I think looking at it based on the conversation and the speculation it has done, perhaps that was the intended, that was the intention. The idea, of course, is that the partial, constitution of the cabinet left everyone guessing. And you remember, even before this list was released, there was a lot of speculation. We had seen so many stories in the media. The following day, again, the story in terms of trying to interpret the president's move, which, in a sense, in my opinion, he was trying to take charge of the narrative, allowing people, of course, to speculate and say all these things. But I have a feeling that most likely he already has the full.
He has a full cabinet.
He has a full cabinet. But releasing these indoses now gets people talking and trying to understand his moves. And I think it has achieved its intended, the intention, so to speak. But there are several issues that have definitely come up and have dominated, of course, our politics. One of them is, the perceived rift between him and the deputy president, and he has come out trying to clarify that. Also, the fact that there was no cabinet secretary appointed from, should I say, the Greater Western region to include also Nyanza, and leave speculation. But I think going forward, the issues that we know he will have to address going forward, one, of course, is the gender component. The gender issue. Minimum, I would say 8 or 9 CSs have to be women. The issue of regional balance, which I suspect...
There's actually a court order that the cabinet constituted after 1st January 2017, after December 2017, should adhere to the gender.
So it's not an option. That one he has to look at. But I think there are 2 other important decisions that would inform, or factors that would inform his decision. One, of course, is his legacy, which he is keen on building, and therefore the people he's bringing on board are people who can help him achieve some of the things he promised in his manifesto. But the second one, of course, is the politics around it, that the deputy president would want to succeed him, and therefore he'd also want to have a hand, or at least a cabinet that performs, and he'll have something to show Kenyans when he goes to request for their votes in 2022. So these are just factors playing below, but in my opinion, this was just meant to create that speculation we have seen.
Mheshimiwa, somebody said
debate
at the beginning of the week that deny is a political strategy, even if there's some truth to it.
At times so, but the matter of appointment of cabinet secretaries, first and foremost, is a matter of law. Once the names have been proposed, they have to come to Parliament for vetting. And a lot of times Parliament can advise the President back that after vetting, or after certain information is presented from the public, because there has to be public participation.
The public can send in memoranda.
Yes, and people, individuals who know certain activities of somebody who has been proposed, or illegalities, or participation of corruption, or misuse of public funds, can present that information to Parliament, and upon deliberation, that particular candidate can be dropped, and the President will be at liberty to present another. First, it's one of the reasons, actually, there should be a constitutional review. Because in some countries like Ghana, you have part of cabinet coming from Parliament and part of cabinet coming from sectors or experts in certain areas. Because you find to drive the agenda of development and the agenda of government, at times you need people with a political streak. And at times you need serious experts who can be able to deliver. Because the moment you appoint someone...
Here, by this you mean part of the cabinet should be members of Parliament? Which are people elected to Parliament, but now you pluck them out, like happened with the Minister for the CS for Mining?
Not necessarily, but
Dan Kazungu, rather.
Yes, not necessarily, but in the future, we're looking at the future when we do constitutional review. It could be one of the proposals we could come up with, but right now, under the current constitution, the president can propose whoever, even if he's a member of parliament. And then it means there will be a by-election.
They relinquish the position.
They will have to relinquish the
So what you're saying is
the current regime.
What you're saying is that we should have part of the cabinet as sitting members of parliament.
Yes, it's a proposal. It works very well in some countries. But the case of Kenya now, the president had proposed names. Of course, there must be regional balance, there must be gender, and there must be people of integrity. And where a person has been proposed and has failed in the job before, or Kenyans know an activity or a reason why that particular person should not become a cabinet member, then have to send a memorandum in parliament or come and defend it or come to talk to the committee which will be doing the vetting. Then the third bit of it is parliament now is like a rubber stamp of the executive. Whatever the executive proposes and the Jubilee party is whipped on that. Any person in Jubilee try to object or make comments, they may find themselves politically in trouble. And we need to avoid that. Members of parliament should talk freely, vote freely, and ensure that the president has a proper cabinet, even if it rejects as many names as possible. And we repeat the exercise as a country till we get it right.
Should be done for the good
of
the
country. Yes, like I was just saying the case of the Minister for Transport. Of course, you know, Kenyans know what has happened so far. He has failed miserably in his duties in the past. Kenyans are dead. Which is one of the persons whose name should actually be...
Which brings me to a question that has been on the tongues of many and has been a point of conflict between NASA and Jubilee. Some, in your opinion, should Parliament revet everybody before Cabinet is reconstituted, or those who had been vetted before should stay out, like they passed in the last Parliament?
Perhaps it's not necessarily a matter of opinion, but what the law says, although you have realized in Kenya the law is not always very clear, and I think it's almost now taking a political angle, in the sense that my reading of it, and perhaps if I could just go back a step earlier and say, the other thing is the president is trying to balance several interests. But the other thing is, remember, he owes very many people, I wouldn't say jobs exactly, but people who supported
favors.
Yeah, I wouldn't call them favors, but people who supported him for the August 8th election. But especially after that, there are quite a number of people who came on board, and perhaps there are those expectations he's trying to balance. But I hope you'll be able to go beyond those interests and not get beholden by them, but make a decision that is in the interest of Kenyans. Now, in terms of vetting, I know there has been that, and remember it started in the previous time where some people were shifted around, and there was that question coming up whether they should now be properly vetted for the new position that they have been given, because the assumption is that the previous vetting was only for a particular post, so that actually they could get to demonstrate their competence, perhaps even knowledge and grasp of issues under that particular ministry. But I think there could be lack of clarity, both in the law but also in the standing orders, that would allow what the majority leader is trying to do, saying that actually those who have been retained do not necessarily need to undergo fresh vetting. Perhaps it's only the new individuals who are coming on board, and I think it's still a matter of interpretation. But in my reading, I think it's just one of those lack of clarity in the law. But because you have...
A maker of the law is here. And luckily enough, Dan Manzo sat in the last Parliament. Is it true what the majority leader said?
I'm not a lawyer by the profession. Yeah. By profession, but I want to think the leader of majority is wrong. First, for the reason that this is a new government. So, and secondly, whoever was vetted last time may have done certain things in the course of their duties. You remember the president relinquishes some of the cabinet secretaries their duties. We are also aware of cabinet secretaries who worked very well, and maybe for reasons we don't know have now been dropped. We are also aware of cabinet secretaries who at some point had a problem with their respective committees. I remember one time the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Amina, the problem with a section of members of her committee, but the reason was very well explained that at times they will summon her, but she will be on official duties outside the country, which is well understood, and I believe it was sorted out, and I believe, unless for reasons yet to be revealed by the government or the public, she stands a very big chance to serve as a cabinet minister in charge of foreign affairs or whatever docket. Again, she was outstanding. But there are others who, as I've said again, the Minister for Roads have performed miserably. Even as the members of parliament, when we summon him in committees, we see the performance. When we visit his office, pursuing government agenda, we find him aloof. And in fact, some of the ministers have survived by virtue of their smart principal secretaries. By themselves, they cannot manage this.
Sam, I'll come to you, but my director is urging me to take a commercial break, so we'll do just that, and when we come back, we finish off with this issue. Before we look at the claims by NASA leader Raila Odinga over the president's actions in making changes in the police service.